let's start with poses, because that's what y'all wanted from the poll. There's a formula for anatomy, but not so much poses, and we'll get into why. So, a lot of the times when I see poses, I see a lot of people go really hard. Some of them have those wooden dolls as well. Let me just say it right now, don't use those wooden dolls. They're great for perspective, not so much for poses. So people might draw their, like, really harsh shapes like this. So let's say that this person is, like, they're jumping up. Let's say if I'm using a wooden doll, and this is what I see on the wooden doll, so I'm like, yeah, I gotta copy that. Exactly. And make it look like that. So this is all structure. I see this a lot with more beginner artists. When you're drawing poses, you need a mix of structure and gesture. Gesture is what adds your movement. If I were to do nothing but gesture, this is all gesture. Gesture isn't necessarily anatomy. Gesture is your movement. When you have a pose, you need to be able to blend the two. Working with all structure, with only structure, creates stiffness, makes pose unnatural. On the contrary, working with only gesture has no accuracy, lack of form. Working with only structure creates stiffness. So it makes the pose super, super unnatural because it's like you're posing one of those wooden dolls. The wooden dolls can only articulate so much. Our bodies bend, they squish, they wiggle around, right? Those wooden dolls don't have the same range of movement that we do. On the contrary, working with only gesture has no accuracy. There's no form in there, right? There's no muscle structure. So you need to be able to blend the two. So blend gesture and structure to create a dynamic pose. When you're doing poses, you want to understand the importance of this structure, but don't hold on to it too tight. Especially when it comes to drawing the full pose. Notice that I didn't draw all these shapes. I kind of drew in the general form of them every once in a while, but a lot of the times I automatically added on that muscle structure. I automatically added that S-curve in there, which is your line of action. Your line of action, by the way, can be described from the back of your head, right? Think of where your spine starts. So at the back of your head comes down to where there's the most weight being placed on the ground. Don't focus on a single area. Work throughout. Start with gesture, then add form. So there is technically an order to do them in. Technically, you want to start with your gesture. So you want to start off with this really simple movement and then add your forms on top so that you can build up the structure as you continue. That's a life drawing exercise. If you focus on a single area for too long, you're going to get distracted. And it's going to take you way too long, especially in something that's more dynamic. You want to work throughout that entire figure to make sure you get that entire gesture in there. Proportions. Proportions are something that a lot of people struggle with. It's a very, very general thing. The thing with keeping your proportions accurate is understanding a few rules. So proportions do have rules. You need to understand and memorize those rules in order to succeed, right? So it's measurements, relativity, etc. Don't try to do guesswork when you're starting out. When you get more experience with anatomy and all that fun jazz, you have a lot of your proportions memorized, you can do guesswork. So a lot of the times you kind of just look what's in front of you and go like, that's approximately right. But when you're starting out with human anatomy, you don't want to do guesswork because when you're first starting, if you're doing your guesswork just straight from the get-go, you're automatically setting yourself up for inaccuracy. So keep using the initial forms until you grow comfortable enough to work without them. All right, that's super important to keep using them. You need to make sure you're comfortable enough with the shapes to the point where you don't have to look at a reference anymore. That's number one. Number two, you should be able to know those shapes by heart. I have them by heart and I can draw them in almost any angle. I still use them frequently, especially if I'm working with more complex poses. I will use those structure and forms all the time. I don't grow out of that because it does help with accuracy, but over time, you just stop needing them. So the thing with proportions is I can't do all the proportions at once. There's so many. We have a full anatomy stream that I have done before, so all the measurements are there. So don't draw your hands or feet too small. Take your hand for me. Just splay it out as if you're telling somebody that there's the number 5. Put your hand over your entire face. Notice that you can put your hand over your entire face. If you're over the age of 11, you should be able to have your hand over your entire face. And guess what? That's because that's how big your hand is. If your hands are smaller than your face, your hand is too small. If you're drawing a head, look at your hand, notice that you can fit your entire face in your hand. That's how big your hand should be. Take your foot for me. If you are flexible enough, put your foot right up against the side of your face. If you're not flexible enough, put your foot up right against your forearm. Notice that your foot is the same length as your forearm or your hand. That is how big your foot is. Feet are quite large. Hands are quite large. Make sure that you're thinking of those sizes. So your hands are the size of your face. Feet are the length of your forearm, height of your head. So make sure you don't draw your arms too long or short. Please. All right, I'm gonna make you do something. I'm so sorry. So if you are sitting down, stand up for me and drop your arms to your sides. Just drop your arms to your sides Have them perfectly straight at either of your sides. Notice that your fingertips go either about halfway down your thigh or 1/3 to 2/3 down your thigh. Notice that they kind of stop midway through your thigh, your fingertips, right? Kind of around that area. That's where your arms should stop. Make sure that your fingers don't stop at the top of the hips or that they don't stop at the knees. That's what I see a lot. People draw their hands either at the knees, at the top of the hips, right? Too short. Don't draw your arms too long or short. So your fingertips should stop approximately 1/3 to 2/3 down your thigh, right? So somewhere between there. Sometimes it's halfway, sometimes it's 1/3, sometimes it's 2/3, right? Depending on the length of your arms, because we are all different people. Some people got long arms, right? But yeah, your elbows are approximately stop at the belly button. Usually it's a little bit above the belly button, a little bit above, a little bit below the belly button, but generally around the center of your stomach. But it's always above the knee. Right? It isn't actually the knee. So yours is probably like about 2/3 on the thigh. How do I know my hands stop at the thigh when arm is somewhere else? Here's the thing. Envision the body as a paper doll. Think of the shoulder here. Think of it as if there's a pin in the center right here. If we have our elbow down here, this pin keeps this portion in place. We need to think of our arm as if it's on one big rotational axis. It cannot go any farther than here. But this length will stay the same no matter where you draw it. It's the same thing with the elbow. Say if this was our actual arm length here. If we have a point here, there's a pin here, and this is where our forearm is. This forearm will stay the same length as a big radius around this center pin. So it will stay the same length no matter what. Say if we had part 1, which is our shoulder that goes down to the elbow. Say if we have a pin in the center here. This pin will not move. This length of the arm will also not change. So no matter where you rotate it, that length of the bicep will remain the same, right? So if we have our arm out here, say if I was to draw on the next part of the arm, forearm and bicep length are the same, by the way. So if we have our little anchor again, directly in the center, our forearm will not change its length. It may change its width because of the muscle right here squishing, but it will not change its length. So think of it as if it's on that anchor. It's a doll. So if you envision this top portion right here, like this, again, you're envisioning the top portion, this shoulder rotating, everything stays the same length. But yeah, envision the body as a paper doll. This will always work as long as the body is not foreshortened. It's like 99% of the time it actually will be, but that's how you think of it. Most of the time.
If you liked what you saw, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an upload. Join our art community with the links down below if you'd like to support the channel and the creation of free arts education. Become a member on Patreon for working files, behind-the-scenes posts, and discounts on our class offerings. If you enjoyed this video, here's a couple other videos you can check out next.